Hey guys, so I come to you with a quick July wrap-up and August TBR. The TBR will be entirely buddy reads and read-alongs, except for one which I've already started and I'm reading on my own. The wrap-up will have one distinctively absent book. I did not end up reading the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin this month or last month. I was supposed to buddy read it with Brian over at Bookish, but I had a bunch of problems getting my hands on it. I had put it on hold at the library, but then it wasn't available, so I had to wait, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and it didn't become available. And so I finally rented an ebook from the library, but that I could only read on my laptop, which I hated. And so then finally I ordered a hard copy in the mail through Amazon, and then the very next day I got a text message telling me that the hard copy was available at the library. So that's just how it happens. And by that point I had just lost all of my momentum with reading that book. So when Brian offered to postpone our buddy read, I had to take him up on it. So, I will still be reading it in September, I believe, but it's not going to be on this wrap-up. But anyway, I also want to let you all know that I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks, starting tomorrow. I'm flying out back to New York for a family reunion, and so I do have one video that is scheduled to upload, but I don't know how much BookTube I'll be able to watch, because not only will I be surrounded by people, I will also be in a place where I will have no internet access and very shoddy phone service, so I may just fall off the side of the world for 2 weeks. But don't worry, I will return, and I will binge watch everyone's videos when I get back, and you will be seeing me again then. So anyway, onto the books. I'm gonna start with a couple that I've already discussed. So the first is Dream Psychology by Sigmund Freud. This was published 20 years after he wrote on the interpretation of dreams, and basically in this book he analyzes a ton of dreams of patients who he's worked with in therapy, and just to show what insights dreams give into the unconscious and into mental illness and just into general psychological functioning. And I have learned a lot about Freud in classes. I study psychology. I'm getting a PhD in it. I have learned a lot about him secondhand and a lot of criticisms of him secondhand. And just hearing about him that much and hearing all those criticisms made me curious about actually reading him and coming to some of my own conclusions. Just because I think that that's intellectually healthy. And I also just thought it would be interesting, because I am intrigued by his theories, even though I don't really put any stock in them. I'm intrigued by them. And I also thought it would be fun to just read this and sort of try to follow his train of thought in his analysis of these dreams, in the way, the logical leaps he has to go through to make these dreams fit the interpretation that he wants to put on them, because of course dreams for him are always about sexual desire and all these hidden desires that we can't talk about in our conscious life. And I did find it very interesting. There was very little discussion of his tripartite division of the psyche and into the id, ego, and superego, and there was very little discussion, almost no discussion, of his developmental theories, of the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, and those are the two most famous aspects of his theories, and the two that I'm most interested in. So I'll probably be reading more Freud to read more up on those. But basically, reading this didn't challenge any of the criticisms that I have heard of Freud. His therapeutic method and his scientific method were both profoundly flawed, but anyway, again, I just found it to be an interesting and I think healthy intellectual exercise again. But yeah, so anyway, that's Dream Psychology. Next is a novel, Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. This was published first in 1984, I believe. It was Louise Erdrich's first novel. And this just follows a large extended family of Chippewa living on a reservation in North Dakota. And it basically just follows their lives throughout the 20th century. It starts in the 1930s with a woman who becomes the sort of grandma of the family later on, as a young woman in the 1930s, and it ends with the sort of newer generation of one particular youngster in the family in the mid-1980s. And yeah, it just looks at these people's lives, really. It's just a sort of slice of life look at Native American life, or the life of one particular family in one particular nation of Native Americans. And I thought it was great. I thought Louise Erdrich did a great job of making me sympathize with people who do really stupid things. The people in here aren't all that likable, but you sympathize with them anyway, even when they do something that is hurtful or dumb. I don't think it's perfect. It is a debut novel, so I wouldn't expect that. The writing does get clunky, and some of the chapters I find didn't seem to serve much of a purpose being in there. She did expand this book in 1993 when it was reissued. In fact, she expanded it quite significantly, because I think the first edition was something like 220 pages, but this is like 360 pages, so I'm guessing she added quite a bit to it. And I wonder how much of that really needed to be added. But anyway, not perfect, but still really powerful. I definitely want to read more Louise Erdrich, so you will be hearing about that. Next is probably my book of the week. It's Young Ovid, A Life Recreated by Diane Middlebrook. Diane Middlebrook is a really well-known biographer. She wrote an acclaimed biography of Anne Sexton, which I actually have on my shelf up there, and which I absolutely want to read after reading this. She also wrote a sort of dual biography of Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, which, as far as I can tell, has also gotten rave reviews. And this is her last book. She originally, going into this, wanted to write a full life of Ovid, who, many of you will know as the author of the Metamorphoses. She wanted to write a full life of him, but in the middle of writing this book, she was diagnosed with cancer, and she realized that she just wasn't going to have the time to get through all of that. And so she reworked the book into just a discussion of Ovid's youth. It's just great. I mean, we don't know much about Ovid's life, and pretty much everything we know from his poetry. His poetry was heavily autobiographical, which I didn't know. I had only read the Metamorphoses, which is probably his least autobiographical work. But, his love poems, the epistolary poems he wrote, they're all laced with his life story. And so that makes this book, both a story of his life, to the extent that we can know it, and also, a piece of literary criticism on his work. And it absolutely made me want to go and try to read some of his lyric poetry. I am a bit trepidatious about reading his lyric poetry because I have grown a bit disillusioned with translations of Latin poetry, but I will try. And it also made me really interested in rereading the Metamorphoses at some point in the not-too-distant future, maybe next year. But yeah, there are just a lot of great insights into his work along the way in here. And also, it's a really interesting, I think, look at Roman society at the time. There's a lot in here about how Roman children were raised, and just Roman society, and also the historical events going on. He lived at a pretty tumultuous time in Roman history, around the time when the Roman Republic was falling and the Roman Empire was coming to power, and that's all great. And yeah, so if you're interested in Ovid, I would definitely recommend this. Alright, onto a couple of books that I have begun already. The first is Friedrich Nietzsche by Curtis Cate. This is a nice big chunky biography of this philosopher who I love. I just mentioned the other day that Thus Spoke Zarathustra was a really important book to me in my formative reading year when I was 21 years old. And I still love it, and I read more of Nietzsche's books, and I still want to read more, and yeah, it's just great to learn more about his life story, and this alternates between his, the events of his life and his philosophy, and not only his philosophy, but the philosophy that influenced him. So discussions of Schopenhauer and Kant are in here, and I really like all that. It's a good sort of, kick in the butt for me to actually possibly maybe read some Kant, or maybe read about Kant. Maybe that's what I'll do, read about Kant. I don't know about reading Kant, but yeah, if there was anything that could make me want to actually read Kant, it would be a discussion of Friedrich Nietzsche. But I'm really liking this. You know, he's only still in his 20s now, by the point I'm at. I'm about 100 pages in, and it's going through a discussion of his friendship with Richard Wagner, which is fascinating to me, because I love the music of Richard Wagner. Anyway, I am really enjoying this. I'm going to chip away at it over the course of the month, because I have a few other books that I need to be reading. But also, in case you haven't noticed, a bit of a common theme, 2 biographies in 1 week. I think biography is becoming a new favorite genre of mine. Yeah, after reading the Ovid biography especially, I just want to dig into more biographies. So anyway, moving on to books that I'm going to be reading. The first is The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present by David Treuer. And this is a book about the history of Native Americans from the massacre of Wounded Knee to the present. In other words, the history of Native Americans that most of us don't ever learn. Most of us, at least in the United States, learn about Native American history up until the massacre of Wounded Knee in 1890. And basically, we learn about it as though from then on, Native American culture and identity and lives essentially ended. And if we hear about them being around today or in the 20th century, it's mostly just to hear about how miserable they are. And this is sort of a counter-narrative to that traditional way of talking about Native American history. Looking at 20th century Native American history in detail and trying to see some light in it. You know, I mean, I don't think this book will be a fun book. It will be, you know, a harrowing book, but I think David Treuer is going to try to also see some light in what's happening with Native Americans at the moment. So that's also a buddy read with Patrice Jones, one of my longtime and wonderful commenters. So I am looking forward to the discussion that we will have over that, I'm sure. And then the last two, my last buddy read is The Civil War by Lucan. This is an ancient Roman epic poem that Lucan wrote about the war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. And Elena and I got super interested in reading it because it was a huge influence on Dante in writing his Divine Comedy. And also I personally, and Elena as well, we both just love epic poems, I think. So that should be a lot of fun. And then finally, I will be reading Dune Messiah for DuneTube, the second installment in the series. And this will be my 3rd time reading this book. I am going to go into it with a totally open mind. You know, I think it's a really healthy habit to develop, to return to books, if you have the time, to return to books that you perhaps didn't like that much initially, and just to see whether perhaps you missed some qualities in it, perhaps you overemphasized some criticisms you had of it, just to, you know, go in with a fresh mind and see whether you can find some redeeming qualities. And that is what I intend to do with Dune Messiah. I'm going to try my best. So I actually am looking forward to reading this, even though it is the weakest book in the Dune saga by far. Anyway, that is all. That is all I have to talk about. I hope this turned out to be a short video. I think it's only just over 10 minutes. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. If you have read any of these books, as always, give me your thoughts. And yeah, I hope you all have a good 2 weeks without me. I will try to drop in when I can. But other than that, I will be seeing you later. So, bye guys.